put a custom QR code on every piece of mail, right? So when the person scans it, they end up on the mailer's landing page, and we can hyper-personalize the landing page if we want.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. I have a marketing episode here for you today with Kevin Lee, owner of Didit, digital marketing agency, the e-marketing association, and various other entities as well. Has been in the marketing game since the 90s, knows what to test, how to optimize, has plenty of examples of scaling campaigns successfully. And we're going to go in depth today here. Kevin, thanks for taking the time to join the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
And want to familiarize audiences. I know we've crossed paths at different conferences and amazed by all you're able to do and manage. Could we begin with your history, your background, leading into what you focus on today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, way back, when I first graduated from grad school, I went to sort of the big Madison Avenue agencies. I worked at J. Walter Thompson. I worked at McCann Erickson. And that was like top funnel stuff, right? So top funnel, when my first exposure to marketing, at least post-grad school, was really like demand creation in the branding arena. So there's less testing and optimization that occurred there, particularly 30 years ago. So once I got into digital, digital really was the first place where you'd get back enough information about what was working and what wasn't working in close to real time. And that just opened things up to the whole concept of, wow, we don't have to set the media plan in stone by Thanksgiving and never touch it again till next Thanksgiving, which was the way things were done at a lot of agencies in the 90s and 80s. So, I was really as a sort of a geeky person in advertising, I was really well positioned to sort of take advantage of the digitization of media.
I love it. I reference traditional media all the time. I got involved, 08, 09, early days of mobile. I was just mentioning, it was referred to as the Wild Wild West at that point, and we were limited on analytics, and we were working with many traditional agencies that were looking to integrate into digital mobile campaigns. But you saw the offline days, you started getting those early metric reports, and you're able to get a better understanding of what worked and what didn't work from the actual numbers you were producing on top of funnel and even lower funnel. When did lower funnel started becoming, in your, viewability? And were there holes and pixels in what you were tracking at that point?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, Didit's first iteration was an SEO tool in 1996. And then in 1999, we built the first bid alert system for GoTo.com, which was the first pay-per-click search engine, which went public as Overture and then eventually got bought by Yahoo, who turned it into Panama. And then they ended up shutting that down. But we had built a bid alert system for their paid placement, which initially was not a yield-managed paid placement. It was literally if you bid a penny more, even if you were Acme Shoes, if you outbid Zappos by a penny, you would show up above them, which of course makes no sense because you would want to yield optimize against relevancy, which is what the ad rank does in Google's AdWords. But we, first went into bid alerts, then we went into bid management, then we went into campaign management, all as a SaaS business. So they didn't even call it SaaS back then. They called it an application service provider, but that ended up being SaaS. And that was really a great business for us. For many years, that was the majority of Didit's business. The real problem in that category was a company called Marin Software, which still exists and is publicly traded. Unfortunately, I think the last time I looked, Marin has never had a profitable quarter in their entire existence. So they raised $101 million in venture. I think they went public at about $420 million valuation and have been burning cash ever since. So you can imagine going to pitch meetings against Marin Software, pretty much every prospect would say, can you match Marin's price? Which the only way for us to solve that was to layer services on top. So as we layered services on top of our own technology, which is called Maestro, we got EBITDA back. But the more services we layered in, the more we looked like an agency. And the more people said, well, we really love your team. Can you also do this for us, meaning social media or programmatic display? And, we integrated programmatic display via Right Media into Maestro. And eventually we didn't need Maestro anymore. So, we ended up sunsetting our Maestro technology. It just became platform agnostic, although we're usually running on the Google stack. And 11 acquisitions later, right, we're a full service mid-market agency with technology at the core. I still like to invent stuff, and I still invented some really fun technology, over the last 2 or 3 years. Because as a marketing mad scientist, that's what you do, right? Even if you're running an agency, it's really fun to invent tech or glue tech together in fun ways. And yeah, pixels and tracking have always had their challenges. In particular,
Yes.
people would think like, well, because it's in a report or because it's in a spreadsheet, it must be right.
Right.
And of course, cookie windows and all these other factors about how you measure changes what you see in the reporting and the educational process for when we were in the software business and we have to educate agencies like Didit who used our platform, as well as when we were working directly with clients. It continues to be the case that people don't realize that this is not census level data, right? There's going to be some sampling error. Certain people are going to disappear. Certain people are going to move from one device to the other. And it's directional, right? So you always need to make the decisions to go in a better place than you are now, but don't look at the reports as the be all and end all. They're just useful for reporting purposes. There's going to be data leakage, et cetera. And the third party cookie and its adventures as it relates to, being dead and then back from the dead
Right.
quite recently has really had implications on not just targeting, but also on testing and also on optimization. And as certain kinds of OSs open and close, like, Apple basically shutting down certain levels of tracking within the Apple ecosystem, it's made things more challenging once again. So it's been fascinating to take that journey with the industry and try to solve those problems.
Yeah, I'm constantly explaining to our clients, prospective clients, about the iOS 14.5 and later updates with Apple requiring mobile users, and so much of the traffic is mobile these days,
Sure.
to opt in to a mobile publisher, giving them permission to track them off app. So, what top of funnel metrics, mid funnel perhaps of lead forms we can track in app, how the conversion amounts will be watered down off app, and determining projections from there. And we'll speak about marketing efficiency ratio, how much is being spent, how much is being produced. We'll work on a lot of investor marketing campaigns, how much is being raised, but if it's e-commerce, how much is being sold, what have you. And making our projections from there, and explaining analytics have never been perfect. There's always been a gray area. Like you said, just because it's showing up on a report doesn't mean it's the be all, say all. It's not necessarily definitive as much as gives indicators in terms of where to optimize towards next, and make data-driven decisions. And if you see those decisions lead to results, at scale, increase daily pacing allocations for an audience, a creative, and you see a similar lift in the following days, weeks, for that segment, you're in a good place, and you could keep ramping it up. But there's always been holes, like you mentioned, the conversion windows, click through, view through, 1 day, 7 days, 30 days. If someone's using multiple devices, if someone else is using that device, IP addresses, all of that can come into consideration. But for those not familiar with those type of reporting, windows, limitations, it could seem more like a storyline, and tougher to optimize towards a campaign, scale into a campaign because of it. So you've seen it evolve since 96, and hearing about the bid alerts to bid management to campaign management. We've used Marin's software years back, and I'm very familiar with their offering and how it's evolved into different channels, different mediums. But you've been along for the ride the whole time, and can't help yourself in creating new tech, new iterations, new ways to do things, and provide better performance.
Yeah, it's really fun because particularly for the medium to larger clients, they have enough scale in their spend that you can more easily see the interaction effects between media when you start to layer them on top of each other, right? The smaller the budget, the more difficult it is to separate the data from the noise when it comes to, for example, going and using some mid-funnel impressions, let's say using programmatic,
Sure.
through an DSP. But as you start to get to scale, you can start to see these interaction effects even between outdoor advertising or print advertising or CTV and search, right? And you can actually say, oh, you can run a test where you run custom audience-based CTV in one neighborhood and not in another. And then you see an increase in search query volume for the brand keyword. Or why did that happen? People got curious, right? And so you start to see these interaction effects. Another really fun thing is one of the tech platforms I invented for direct mail was to put a custom QR code on every piece of mail, right? So when the person scans it, they end up on the mailer's landing page, and we can hyper personalize the landing page if we want. But you typically would want to do a digital overlay to that person's office and or house, because you don't just want them to see the direct mail. You want them to see the same brand in other forms of marketing as well, because it reinforces it. Like, these guys must be legit. I see them everywhere. No, you see them everywhere. Not everyone else sees them everywhere. That's on purpose, right? We want the prospect to feel like these guys are legit as a result of spending, right? People subconsciously think like, oh, if I see the brand a lot, they must be legit, right? And I think the direct mail comes along with a level of authenticity that doesn't exist in pure digital, right? Like, oh, these guys paid for a stamp, right? They must really think I'm important. They mailed me something. And so it's really fascinating. For high enough value categories, it makes sense to do things like direct mail or CTV, right? And the high LTV or just a willingness to pay a higher CAC means that you can start to be a little bit more sophisticated in what you do.
Yeah, that CAC, that customer acquisition cost, and being able to have an omni-channel, multi-channel approach. You're mentioning CTV, connected TV, digital TV that we're seeing. You're talking about direct mail and all these placements, a whole nother aspect, whole nother lens that you have to look at in terms of optimizing on a channel basis and determining where to put more efforts, more budget. When I hear budget, I'm really thinking more impressions, more people seeing the placement, more traffic. Anything that's too low, it could come out as inconclusive data. You're prioritizing ones and zeros, which could be a coincidence. You see one conversion here one day where, if there's not enough. I know the programmatic media, you're mentioning programmatic, machine learning on ad exchanges where websites, apps, ad networks can buy and sell remnant in unsold inventory in real time and at discounted rates, or wholesale rates, I should call it. Being able to look at larger amounts of traffic, it allows the machine learning, they call it AI on many of these platforms now, to really do its thing in more intelligent ways. Or when the data is too thin, you could be going in the wrong direction and just trying to make use of the time.
Yeah, that's one advantage that the larger marketer has over the smaller marketer is they have more rich data sets. And not only the data sets richer, but you reach statistical relevance more quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a large marketer can get the answer to a test sometimes the same day, whereas it might take a month for a small to mid-sized marketer to get enough information as to whether a test is working or not. So as you test and optimize and scale, right, you need to take into account the fact that, well, do I have enough information actually to make a decision with confidence, or is this just an anomaly? And larger marketers have this, data advantage that the small to medium-sized marketer doesn't.
Absolutely. And those small to medium-sized marketers, even off a month, maybe, trying to come to conclusions with a smaller sample size, a smaller amount of traffic than that larger bidder in a single day. So it is really interesting to watch. You were talking about cookies, pixels, tracking. A cookie-less world is something that's been brought up a lot since iOS 14.5 a few years back now. Google's recently announced they're pushing that back and sticking with pixels for longer than the projected date that they've changed multiple times already. Where do you think the future of analytics is going? Is it all going to be, ecosystems and audiences, data sets that publishers are able to track all the way through their stack? Or how do you envision the future of tracking and measurement?
Yeah, I think we never had census level data, right? And we still don't, especially if the users we're trying to target are on an app or on Safari. And so we're sort of behind that closed ecosystem. Obviously, there are also the walled gardens
Yes.
like Meta. And Meta uses a completely different internal set of algorithms to provide dashboard level reporting than you would see if you try to use external metrics to understand how well Meta is working. And so they don't have a high level of transparency with how they arrive at their data. Is it directionally accurate? Longitudinally, yes. But again, you have to sort of take it with a grain of salt. So I do think marketers will have to get more used to sort of just understanding that whether they should take a left or a right, as opposed to obsessing over specific numbers, right? Because as long as you're always improving your campaigns, right, then you are in fact moving in a better direction. It was the reconciliation perfect between 3 reporting systems and exactly how many high quality, high scored leads it generated. It's not always going to be perfect. The other thing that I think marketers need to remember is that earned media needs to be in the mix as well, right?
Yes.
So paid media is great because you can sort of kick it off on a day or two's notice, get everything set up, right? There may be AI-based learning for each of the platforms as it starts to learn which creative works and as it starts its optimizations. Or there may be creative approvals on certain platforms before things go live. But you can get live on paid media pretty quickly. But the chatbot revolution, the AI chatbot revolution, means that not only do you have to do SEO to try to end up in the search engine results page of Google and maybe Bing, if you want to be there as well, but you have to sort of think through, well, what if a person asks ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, what is the best insert problem here, right? If you solve that problem and you're not there, that means somebody else is there. So that's even more of a zero-sum game than search. At least in search, if you said, well, I'm not number 1, but I'm number 3. Okay, well, if number 1 and number 2 don't solve the problem, you still got a pretty good chance they'll come back and hit you at number 3. But if the person asks an AI for what's the best solution to this problem, it's really like a search engine results page of 1. Right. And it's a completely different algorithm. So hottest area among my SEO team right now is what some people are calling LLMO, large language model optimization. And it's a completely different set of ranking, if you want to call them, factors for LLM optimization versus SEO. There are some overlaps, which is where I usually recommend people put the most energy. Because if you can simultaneously be helping your old school SEO and influencing AI results at the same time, it's easier to justify to the CFO, but you're not going to be able to justify it in the same way that you do paid media, which is, I put in $10,000 and I got 14,000 worth of leads out of it, right? And therefore it was like buying dollar bills for 80 cents or 70 cents. Earned media, SEO, content marketing, all these other digital PR, regular PR, all those things still need to be done. You're just not going to quite have the same dashboards that you're used to in paid media.
Going to get even blurrier in that regard. And what are you guys finding? Content marketing, code for offsite SEO, right? You get your site to rank for the right keywords and then, show authoritativeness, broad sense, with content marketing, social media, email, long form content, getting third parties to talk about you with high authority as well, high authority links back perhaps. But, for content marketing, ranking for search engines, what about ranking for these, larger language models where, you want to show up for an AI result? Are you guys, seeing anything that's meaningful, actionable, for listeners, for viewers?
Sure. Yeah, it really depends on the competitive set, right? So if you said, hey, we just raised $1 billion to compete with Expedia in the travel world, right? Both your SEO challenge and your LLM visibility challenge would be high, right? It's very difficult to start the New York Marathon an hour late and win the race. So in the startup world, you have a very different set of best practices than you would for an established business who's already within grasping distance right, of either SEO visibility or already has some visibility to the LLMs. So in both cases, though, usually it's some form of almost like a barnacle SEO strategy. So if you remember the term barnacle SEO, right, the idea was, well, I might not be able to get my domain to rank because I'm new, but I could create content or co-create content with other people and get it up all sorts of other places that Google already loves, right? And that looks a lot like PR or digital PR or content marketing, because sometimes those partners where the content sits could end up being your customers, right, or your suppliers, folks that are friendlies that you can go and co-create the content with without having to be like one of these cold emails that never works, right? I mean, go to your friendlies and think about how can we talk about my business in a positive way, or talk about both the businesses in a positive way. I mean, if this ends up on YouTube, what we're talking about now, right, that'll get transcribed. It will decide that maybe you and I are actually smart or not, and it'll get, in an LLM. Now, maybe Google will restrict that just to Gemini, because Google wants to have the YouTube transcripts inform only the Gemini LLM. Maybe it will let ChatGPT get in and consume that content. But that concept of, create content in many different formats and put it out there in many different places is very similar to barnacle SEO. Then what you need to do, if you're starting to think about, well, now I think the LLM has ingested the content, the next step beyond that is, well, did the LLM get it right? If the LLM got it right, then you're great, right? But chances are the LLM got it wrong. So LLMs learn from human interaction. And so you should have, your teams inform the LLM that it was wrong. Now, you can't do sort of black hat LLM manipulation. But again, if you do solve the problem, if you're the Royalton Hotel in New York City that has a pool on the roof and the LM doesn't know that you have a pool, and somebody said, what's the best hotel that has a pool on the roof? At least you have a viable, excuse to say, well, you forgot the Royalton. You can tell ChatGPT you forgot the Royalton, or you can tell Claude, or you can tell Gemini, what about that? And it will go out and it will research it. And hypothetically, that will get ingested and modify the future results. So oddly enough, this is like a resurgence in the kinds of skill sets that PR agencies sort of already understand, which is strategic storytelling and content placement, but it also has a lot of elements of SEO in it. Because old school SEO, you'd be like, well, I didn't get the link, it wasn't so valuable. Well, in the cases of LLMO, just having the mention is valuable, right? You don't need the backlink, because backlinks are not a factor to the same extent in a large language model.
LLMO optimization, LLM optimization. Not a topic that is brought up on this podcast before today, and I know it's more of a forward-looking, futuristic discussion point. What about for listeners, for viewers who want to come up with some new tests for their own marketing, their own growth? What would you recommend for them? I often say starting with strategy, if it's beginning there, or some specific channels, audiences, funnels, what have you. What tests would you recommend for those tuned in today?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about testing is sort of a compound marketing concept, which is that, you need to be optimizing at every step from the impression all the way through to where you make your money, right? And the reason that it's important to think about each of those touch points as the consumer journey happens is because if it breaks at any one of those stages, you can't afford as much for the media. And if you improve it at one of those stages, you can actually afford more for the media. So if you think about, B2B, a higher quality lead means you can afford more for the media. When you can afford more for the media, it opens up media buying opportunities that were closed to you previously. So I really like to work backwards from your equivalent of the shopping cart, right? B2B isn't the shopping cart, but at the same time, what's your ICP? What's the difference between an average lead and a great lead, right? Work that back. Try to understand everything that's predictive about a great lead versus a mediocre lead, or a great customer versus a mediocre customer. And then think about optimizing that all the way up to the impression level. And then at the impression level, you'll use all the targeting levers at your disposal to run the tests. what's fascinating about a lot of the platforms is they are moving into this modality where they're saying, trust us, let our AI do the optimization for you, like Google's Performance Max, for example. And we find that while Performance Max has its place in the campaign structure, we almost always are running a manually optimized campaign in parallel with Performance Max, because then we can do a lot more of that heavy lifting data analysis on the back end to know what is most predictive about the best customer. Because sometimes trying to pass that back into the ecosystem for Performance Max breaks, and it doesn't know the difference between a great lead and a mediocre lead, or a great customer and a mediocre customer, or LTV in the case of e-commerce, right? So, whether you're trying to source investors or you're trying to source customers, right? There's a difference between a mediocre lead and a great one. So I do recommend people sort of work it backwards, right?
Yes.
It's that, because think about your ICP, your ideal customer profile, or your ideal lead, whatever, and then all the factors that are predictive about them being great or not. Their wealth, their income, their operating system, the time of day that they came in as a lead. All these factors will influence the kinds of tests you'll run. And then, bubble that forward. Because if you do it that way, you may find that, a media type that failed previously, all of a sudden, you can go back and try it. So LinkedIn, for example, tends to be pretty expensive on the front end metrics, right?
Sure.
And sure, if you were overly liberal in the targeting on LinkedIn, it might not work. But if you started to really refine the targeting more, you might find, okay, I lost some of the scale by slicing off some of these segments of the campaign, but at least I can keep that media on, right? Versus having it off. So it's sort of you're backing into the scale, right? You're getting the scale by allowing, increasing the allowable of the media that you can buy.
Working it backwards, using fundamentals, really understanding your ideal customer profile, the differentiators about your product, how to have that represented in messaging, larger value transactions, lifetime value. I love pointing at lifetime value allows advertisers to not just focus on that first conversion, but that bigger payout over time. And then, as you said, be able to look at more expensive mediums, have more ability to test further before shutting things off, and really focus on quality versus initial customer acquisition cost, return on ad spend. I know for lead gen, that's definitely the focus, is quality over quantity. What about optimization? What do you do when things are not working right out of the gate, or if it plateaus? Mid-campaign, later in the cycle, even when it's working and you're looking to optimize towards the pocket's performance, towards what's really driving. What has been your approach? What's been most productive for you in terms of optimization?
Yeah, it differs by channel. But in certain channels, social in particular, you can end up with creative burnout. And so you need to be rotating creative in and out much more frequently. Search is as a result of a person raising their hand and saying they have an interest or they have a problem. And so the chances of them having run into your creative before is very, very low. Whereas in social, the chances are pretty high that they will have run into your creative before, especially because if you sort of think about the way people consume social, there's a small segment of the population that are extremely heavy users of each platform. And then there's a whole bunch of people in the middle. And then there's the long tail of people who never go there, right? And so what ends up happening because of the way advertising works is you're likely to be seen most early on by the people who are the heavy users, right? Who are probably also the most immune to the advertising messages. So like, the ads are sort of burnt out on them, right? And then you'll start to plateau, you'll hit the impression caps, or the AI system will start to say, oh, we didn't get response out of these people, and it's going to start to auto-optimize. And so you need fresh creative to sort of re-energize the campaigns and try to break through that clutter for those audiences who might not have responded to your first creative.
Fresh creative, looking at where folks are in the funnel, prioritizing which ones you're going after based on their usage, on their activity. You've been able to manage this to a point of effectiveness, across campaigns since the 90s, by the sound of it. Any tips, any examples towards scaling? That's what everyone wants to talk about, right? And hitting those higher
Yeah.
levels, taking on more market share, that you can recommend to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, one way to scale that is counterintuitive is actually to move some of your media into the mid funnel, right? Because people are more willing to engage with an ad that is typically a lower funnel ad, like a search ad or a lower funnel social ad that has a call to action in it, if they're familiar with the brand, right? And so there's a reason why the big brands are the big brands, and the big brands advertise on TV and buy Super Bowl spots and all those things, right? Is because that familiarity with the brand makes the lower funnel more efficient. So that still doesn't mean that you just sort of spray wildly into the upper funnel. You still need to think about who your ICP is and what your media plan targeting looks like. But to get scale, you will plateau if you only harvest existing demand, right? In search in particular, you'll plateau if you're harvesting existing demand. So then the question becomes, well, I have to move a little bit into demand creation. I can't just harvest demand. And so to do demand creation, you need to start to move into strategically, you have to move into the mid funnel. Upper funnel, all right, if you start to tap out in the mid funnel, you can move into upper funnel. And you can answer the question about whether it's working or not by doing, in particular, geographic split tests, right? So, for example, if you were like, I do think like there's a lot of really great audio content around what it is that I do, right? And I think it would work, but I'm not sure. So take a medium-sized city that has your ICP in it and just dump a lot of media dollars into that city. It won't be that expensive. And if your analytics suddenly spikes up in a positive way for people from Albany, New York, or Cincinnati, Ohio, or wherever you were testing it, and it seems like the delta in value was pretty significant, you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. Spotify or iHeartMedia in Cincinnati, that clearly drove lift because I took the 4 other cities that are the same size. I didn't do anything new there. And I just did a heavy up audio buy in this one location. You want to try outdoor, digital outdoor, do the same thing, right? Run it in a specific city. You can even put custom QR codes on the digital outdoor so that you know which placements are working. Is it Grand Central or is it Penn Station? So, think about other ways to be, fish where the fish are, right? They may not be ready to bite, but at least if you're fishing there, you have a chance.
Well said. And you're giving me ideas. I'm a page into notes here. Focusing on mid funnel, using upper funnel if needed, demand creation, being able to geo split test and look at other segments of the audiences and heavy up on additional channels, additional touch points, more about that user journey. It's probably going to be, the classic 7 touch points or more before they convert. So many people want to focus on, more retargeting or more of the, ad sets that are producing the best results today. But like you said, that could plateau and you really need more, fresh traffic on a daily basis, more, mid funnel occurring that could then mature into that lower funnel.
Yeah. And, make sure that if you've got a complex sale, make sure you give people the opportunity with some kind of a carrot that you dangle to get PII from them, right? So that, even if they're not ready to take that final step that you were hoping they were going to take, that you have to now rely on retargeting, right? Because retargeting has plenty of leaks in that data bucket. So you want to try to establish a personalized relationship with folks.
Which is difficult to do across, millions of people, thousands of people using digital channels. But that's what digital really allows for is that scale and the personalization, because you could be running different messaging. You could be taking audiences to different funnels, all based on those ICPs you were talking about. So I love it. This is a thorough breakdown, more detail than we're able to go into, even with other, media buying thought leaders on the podcast. Can't thank you enough for the time, Kevin, for hopping on
My
and
pleasure,
being
Jason.
able to educate us here. If listeners want to get in contact with you or just learn more about what you do, what's the best place for them to visit? Where should they go? And what are any final thoughts you want to leave them with here today?
My LinkedIn profile is the best way to see all of my various personalities, including my nonprofit that does cause marketing and Truth Nutrition, the brand that I run, and my incubator, Various Ventures, which isn't on the banner behind me. So my LinkedIn pretty much has all my personalities on there. Should be able to find me there.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Kevin, can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. You are
Likewise.
a wealth of media buying, data, marketing, scalability, insights here. I really appreciate you taking the time to enjoy the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks, Kevin. Thank you to everyone listening in as well, too. We will see you next time on the next podcast here. Take care.